Good. Well, welcome back, everyone, to the Coalition for Marriage YouTube channel. Those of you joining us for the first time, as I often say, we are the UK's largest pro-marriage organisation. We represent tens of thousands of individuals and groups, and we support this thing, one man, one woman marriage. Nobody else really seems to be standing up for that these days. We don't come at it from a faith base. Our supporters come from all faiths and none, but we use the secular evidence because it seems to be the case, unequivocally, that there is this thing between a man and a woman that no other relationship type can mimic in terms of bringing about the best version of the next generation. Nothing comes close. We think it's really important that we mention that as a society, that we recognize that as a society, and that we stand up for that as a society. And, you know, I'm so pleased to say that we've got a wonderful guest today who has written 16 books, in fact, but I want to focus on one of his books. In terms of our guest, I promise not to do the rest of the interview in rhyming couplets, but I'm overjoyed that it's Steve McCoy. Stephen, would you like to say hello to our viewers?
Hello, nice to be with you all, and thank you for allowing this chance to just to say hi and express my views.
Just a little bit of biographical stuff. You grew up in Ethiopia, son of a missionary
Yes.
family. I think you then trained as a nurse in Ireland. You've married a Welsh woman, and you're living in Scotland.
Yes.
You're running a missionary publishing organisation. You've got a PhD in theology. You're a preacher, an established preacher, and as I mentioned, you've written like 16 books. And so you're a man of substance who's delivered an awful lot of stuff. And I just want to remind our viewers, yes, we have a lot of Christian supporters. I would say maybe most of them, but I regularly interact with people of other faiths and people of no faith and atheists. You know, I have some very good friends who contact me through C4M regularly and have discussions, you know, about the sport. But I think what we're going to discuss in your book, and the book we're looking at today, is called In His Image, a biblical introduction to social ethics. And this is one of those videos I don't often, Stephen, I don't often ask and I'll let you talk in a minute. I don't often ask our viewers to do stuff, but I think this is one of those interviews I would like you, if you have a pastor, to forward this to your pastor. If you have other Christian friends or non-Christian friends, to let them know, because this is one of those interviews, it's kind of like a seminal book, I think, that you've written. In terms of waking people up to the need to get involved with the culture, with what's happening in terms of social ethics. And you refer to it as biblical social ethics, but the principles are the same and available to anyone. Tell me, first of all, before we look at the content of the book, why did you think it was necessary to write it?
I think it actually came out of my ministry. My wife and I, when we began working for Glow, which is the organization that I work for, one of the things that we did was to get involved in church planting. And the area where we planted a church with others was an area of fairly high social deprivation. And when you get up close to people, most of the folk who we worked with, related to, didn't have much of a church background. They came from all kinds of different challenges, and often the blended families, the single parent setups, cause practical difficulties. And when you love people, when you care about them, when you're concerned about their everyday needs, you notice what has gone wrong. And it struck me really forcibly, dealing with lots of these families, that there are some basic challenges here that, had they, I guess, realized the significance of the family and stability in the family, lots of the heartache which they were going through would have been avoided. So it struck me as massively relevant for pastoral ministry and just for dealing with everyday people.
That's a point which cannot be missed, that the impact, for example, of doing things like redefining marriage and saying, well, actually, it's just about feelings, it's not about commitment. Removing the essential nature, which we spoke before we were recording, of women, etc. It transforms the perception of marriage in the zeitgeist. And things like no-fault divorce, the second redefinition of marriage, which was saying, look, it's not permanent, it needn't be permanent, you can walk away with impunity. These things alter the public consciousness. But as you've rightly mentioned, the people who are hurt by this this are the poorer parts of the community who could best do with things like marriage to give them the security and the benefits that that kind of situation brings. The more wealthier types are still marrying in large numbers and increasing numbers, and it's the poorer parts who are suffering. And that's the real shame of these kind of situations, apart from the wrongs and the rights of it or the biblical views. You know, the fact that the poor are suffering in ever increasing numbers, and that's such a shame. So I'm glad that you've addressed this. Tell us a little bit more about the contents of the book and where do you go with it?
Well, I guess I begin with what it means to be human, because whether you're a person of faith or not, you have to recognize that being human is quite a distinctive thing. I love nature programs. I love David Attenborough, and I love viewing the animal kingdom. But when you see a human being, their intellect, their creativity, the sense of right and wrong, the moral framework that we instinctively have, there's something very noble and transcendent about being human, and we daren't forget that. And of course, that's grounded within the Bible itself, because God has made us in His image, and that's quite weighty, but massively important. We are not just a collection of cells. We're not just one of the animal kingdom. We are special. We are distinct. We are precious, and we know that actually. You could talk to somebody who doesn't have any kind of religious background, and if they observe, for example, a murder taking place, they're shocked by it, they're distressed by it, because they know that those human beings are of inherent value. Now that comes straight from their own humanity, because we just know the humans are valuable. That's exactly, of course, what the Bible says about that. So I begin with does it mean to be human? What makes us as human beings distinct and special? And then I jump to the Ten Commandments themselves, because, again, from a Christian perspective, I find the Ten Commandments fascinating, because what God did with Israel, early Israel, was amazing. They were a freed slave nation going towards the promised land. And God stopped them at a given point and said, I need to give you values, because unless you have values to frame your life, your nation, there's going to be chaos. And if you look at the Ten Commandments, yes, in one sense, they are spiritual, religious, etc., etc. But they're also common sense. How can you function as a society unless there are boundaries and limitations that enable you to live successfully together? And lots of folk look at the Ten Commandments in a kind of a negative light. Surely this is God just trying to tell us what to do. It's actually much more than that. God wants the best for us. And the best for us means having a framework that enables us as a society to live successfully together, to have cohesion, to have respect for each other. And I try to emphasize just how good they are. And then I go to look at some specific issues that do relate to family life, which includes marriage itself. It includes abortion and the value that we place on human life, and the value of the unborn child. And then, of course, the whole trans issue, all of which affects our everyday lives and our community.
Yeah. And I think that the premise of your book, and this is why I think it's so important and so many people need to read it, is that it's absolutely essential that people get involved. We Stephen, live in a country where very recently a woman was arrested for thinking in the street.
Yes.
For silently standing and thinking in her head. And because she admitted to those thoughts, she was arrested. Yep. Silent shocking. Prayer is what they call. Now we live in a sort of country where we have non-crime hate incidents, where if somebody reports that they're offended by something you said, the police can record it as a non-crime hate incident, and that somebody can, if you're applying for a job that requires a police check, without you even knowing, without any due process, that could be highlighted, and you may not get that job because of somebody else's feelings about what you said. So, things are decaying around us. The idea that we're all equal is being challenged regularly, that some people's feelings and needs are being placed above others in terms of hierarchies in society. And this is happening regularly. And your point is that as Christians, especially, the Great Commission, it's really interesting because a lot of people think about the Great Commission as Christians going out and evangelizing, which, yes, absolutely, that's what the Great Commission is. But you look at the text and it says, teach them everything I have taught you. Now, Christ taught extensively, and the idea that the absolute compunction of Christians must be to go and take those teachings out to the world, and not just think it's not my, and hence, the idea of salt, that you are the salt, you stop the rate of decay. If you don't do that, there is no other salt. And then we get exactly what we're seeing around us.
Absolutely. And if you think of the analogy of salt that Jesus used, salt had two functions. One was it stops decay. And we all know, I was at the dentist yesterday, getting a filling redone because my teeth were decayed. We know that decay is bad, not just in the human body, but in society at large. So it's good for society to stop decay. Secondly, of course, salt makes your food taste good. And that's what Jesus meant. We as Christians are to have the kind of influence that our neighbors, our friends, they feel as if life is better because we are there. That's a kind of positive side to the Christian message. And we need to get back to this thought that God values society. He values our lives. He wants what's best for us. God is not some kind of ogre or autocrat. God wants the very best. So as Christians, surely we should want the best for society. And that means wanting a society that's stable, that's safe, where people respect each other, where life is seen as valuable, and where we want to grow and bring up our children within a safe, caring environment where they feel they can express themselves, where they themselves have freedom, but within boundaries to enable them to thrive. Now, is that not good for society?
Yeah,
absolutely. I think
right.
It is, and that's what we want as Christians.
Yeah.
There's nothing foreboding about that. God wants the best for society, and we should want the best as well, which is why we have our value system.
Yeah, and let's make it clear, right, that's in a liberal democracy, and you have to kind of distinguish your thinking, or one has to distinguish one's thinking around these things. In a liberal democracy, people should be free, adults should be free to live the life they want to, within obvious bounds and constraints. No one's saying you shouldn't do that. But then using the salt analogy again, we often talk about marriage like salt, sodium and chlorine. And those two atoms together form a compound, a molecule, which has specific properties chemically. And they have, as you've mentioned, they reduce the rate of decay. They can act as flavor enhancers. They can act as fertilizers. They have a specific purpose. That doesn't mean that any other chemical compound is bad per se, right? I know the church may have different views, and we can talk about that. But from a kind of egalitarian state perspective, salt has a purpose. Saying that doesn't mean that other chemicals and compounds are bad. But when you redefine salt to include things that look a bit like salt, so as not to offend those other things,
but aren't.
You really mess things up badly. And we're seeing the mess around us. From having redefined marriage to say, well, it's not really about a man and a woman and about a contract with society gone and society future and raising the next generation. It's really about who likes who. And as soon as you redefine it to include all those other things that look a bit like salt but aren't salt, you get the absolute chaos that we've got.
You do. And when you're dealing at ground level, as you do in pastoral work, and you talk to a young person who comes from a family that is broken, where there's animosity, where they've had, for example, several father figures there in place, where there's a lack of commitment and a lack of stability, and they're not sure who they can trust. And you see the damage and the hurt that causes. It really tears a life apart. And we should care about that kind of stuff. That's important.
Yeah.
Because
and I don't want to get personal. I try and keep myself out of it because it's usually all about the people I'm talking to, but I know what it's like to grow up in a pretty broken family background. And it isn't, it's not something you would want to do from choice. And, I would say, 20 years of marriage it took to sort me out. And perhaps I'm a bit more rational now than I ever was, and you can see the difference between how a well organized, loving family functions compared to something else, and these things are good and healthy for society. And while other people may be able to do what they want to do, let's not make that the main message. That's the point. You can respect that, but not make it the main message, because the main message is the thing that brings about the greatest good for the largest number of people. And when you remove that main message, things just start. Look at the marriage rates now. Look at we've got a birth rates massive problem on our hands in terms of not enough children being born to sustain the country's future.
We do, and by the way, can I just say, we are not being judgmental here. I know lots of, for example, single parents who are bravely bringing up their children, doing the best they can. They are loving, they are caring. So at no point are we judging other people. At no point are we being critical. It's not that at all. What we are saying is, what is the best, the healthiest environment that enables children to thrive? And surely we should want that. And yes, there are broken situations, and we want to provide pastoral care and love for folk who are struggling. But at the same time as we do that, we also have to say, if you want the optimum environment for children, we have to have goals, and we have to, I think, from a government angle, underpin the vital institution of marriage, because a stable family life is the heartbeat of any society. It's the building block of any society, and stable family life must be based on the committed institution of marriage. There's no better way of doing it than that, and that's what we're saying.
Yeah, and statistically, from an evidentiary point of view, that's the case. Now, there have been one or two studies published recently that try to imply that children growing up with same-sex couples do at least as good, if not better, than true. Well, again, I would just prompt people to look not only at the study, but to look at the methodology of the study, and also to look at the wider group of studies. The better studies are the studies that involve most people and take subjectivity out of the conclusions. Now, some of those latter studies I mentioned don't do either of those two things. They're very subjective, they're self-selective, and they're very, very small. When you look at books, so Walter Shum has written a book, Same-Sex Parenting Research, which at the time took in all of the, looked very broadly and objectively at the research, and the outcomes really aren't good. But that's any relationship which is not growing up with your biological mum and dad in a married relationship will not be as good statistically. There will always be examples on both sides, of course there will, where it bucks the trend. But generally speaking, on a population basis, nothing replaces growing up in a stable home with your married mum and dad. And I know there are situations where that doesn't work out, abuse, adultery, abandonment, but that's the exception, not the rule. Let's promote the rule which provokes goodness in society.
Oh, I agree. And actually, in this debate, things are conflated. What I like about what Shum did in his research is this: you can always find individual exceptions. That's the case in every walk of life. But he took, as you said, a wide sample of surveys done with different population areas, different geographic areas. I think there's something like 400 studies, and he said, what's the big picture, the big learning we can derive from all of this? And that's the only way you can get away from the politicization of research, because let's face it, lots of research can be politicized and you can make statistics say anything. But if you take the entire core sample, the whole thing, and say, what are the broad lessons here? And I think his lessons lead in a definite direction. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to be honest with our research rather than just look for individual exceptions that might buck a trend.
Yeah. So, I mean, the short and the long, the nub of your thesis, which I agree with 100%. And let me just remind people that the book is relatively short. It's not one of these 600-page tomes. It's really small. Readable. It's digestible. Yeah. It's got short chapters. It covers the topics, introduction to the topics. And the idea is pastors and teachers, you need to be helping your people, A, to understand what these problems are. It's part of the gospel work that you're doing. A, to understand, and B, to encourage them to be salt and light in the world. you are the salt. If the salt loses its saltiness, there is no other salt. So, we've got to get involved in whatever way we can, whether that just be, dropping in a word in a conversation, whether that be writing to your MP or whether that be standing for Parliament, or even, and let me just drop this in, I was amazed to find out recently that in all of my local constituencies, and this is replicated up and down the country, there are about 11 to 13 people in whichever party you choose who select the candidates to go on the list. Yep, 11 to 13 people. Now imagine that. You might be in a church with 300 or 400 people, which might be around the corner from another church with 600 people, do you know what I mean? And you think, can we not find 11 to 13 people to go and get involved in these processes, and in one election cycle to literally change the outcome of the country? Whichever party, choose candidates which are socially aligned with family values, whatever the economic policies are. Economics goes up and down. Policies need to change as the economy changes, but the social values last forever, and they build a nation which nothing can challenge. And those are the sorts of people we need standing for Parliament, which means we need people that believe that sort of thing, getting on those selection lists and choosing those people, and this is about being salt, rubbing yourself into society, getting yourself onto health boards, joining school governors, joining trusts and foundations as directors and trustees, getting involved in whatever capacity you can to try and nudge it forward a little bit.
It's caring for people. At the end of the day, what kind of a world or society we produce will affect ordinary, everyday people, and their lives could be either enhanced and enriched and blessed and helped by our society, or they can be damaged. Now, what is it we want? Surely we want what's good for our society. And so it's not just specifically being a Christian. I am a Christian. I'm unapologetic about being a Christian, but I have friends who are Muslims, friends who are Buddhists, friends who are atheists, and they also care for society. So surely there should be some consensus that wraps around how do we create a society that's a safe place for children to grow up in, where they're not jumped on from a very early age and have their minds filled with all kinds of distorted ideas, giving them the freedom to think for themselves, to express themselves, to have the freedom of speech to say if they are concerned about something, which we are, and then creating a society where they can really thrive. That must be what we want, and we share that aspiration with lots of other people, as you say, from all faiths and none. Most of us want a good society where our kids can flourish, and that's the kind of world we're trying to build.
Yeah, and work out what you can do, because I get, some people actually, I can't lose my job. I need to put food on the table, and that literally is it. There's a chilling factor. I mean, a lot of the cases, I interview a lot of people who have lost their jobs and have said, no, I'm not putting up with this. I have a right to believe what I believe. And they've won their cases and they've won big payouts. But the process is the punishment, and it has a chilling effect on other people. Even though they're absolutely in the right and they're vindicated, it nevertheless because people think, I don't want to go through that. I don't want to suffer that pain, and the idea of having to, call out your school for the nonsense they're teaching, and to kind of highlight your child or make your child stand out from the class by saying, no, I'm not going to chant that thing. I'm not going to believe that thing because it is essentially a lie and I will not do that. It's hard for kids to do that. I get that. But nevertheless, we should all be trying to do as much as we feel we can. And even if that involves supporting organizations who are perhaps able to be more bold about it, then just go and do that if that's all you can do.
One of the big dangers I think we do face as a liberal democracy now is the assault on freedom of speech. Now, it works always because those folk who are my opponents, for example, they need the right to say what they want to as well. That's fine by me. I think we need to, as a grown-up society, be able to discuss things honestly and openly. But what is happening increasingly is this deplatforming, the silencing of dissent. Some of the major institutions of state now clamping down on freedom of speech, which I think is terribly dangerous.
Yes, yeah. Now here's a really interesting conversation, because there's a couple of books. There's, what is it? It's Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, and then there's another book, I forget the author's, Beautiful Trouble, and these are books in which the if what collective noun should I choose, the antagonists, yeah, these are books which actually literally describe the tactics. And it's funny because like I referred here on, I was at a conference and there were screaming people outside the front with their loudspeakers trying to disrupt. They didn't like, and in fact, I've, as Coalition for Marriage, I've been asked to leave hotels before now because people didn't like the message, and we will shut you down. You're not allowed to say what you've got to go. You can't speak here. Dealing with this, people sometimes need a bit of help dealing with these sorts of things. Those two books are quite useful because they describe the tactics that are used. And there's this concept of, I came across the other day, so it's worth mentioning in case it helps anyone, mid-level aggression. Yep. So you've got the situation where someone's playing these loudspeakers to disrupt you, or someone stood in front of you with a finger pointing right in your face saying, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you. It has two purposes. In those books, the second book especially, it describes why you do that. It's not because you want to disrupt. It's because you want one of two things to happen. You either want the person not to react, which means they've got you, they've beaten you, yep, or you want the person to overreact. And when they overreact, the cameras are there waiting. And the story is, look at this horrible, aggressive person beating down these poor guys, shouting or going nuts. And that becomes the story. So it's really interesting even to think of things like that. The way you deal with that is by simply, calmly, gently calling it out. I'm not going to ignore you, but neither am I going to give you what you want.
Yes.
I know you're here because you have no argument against what is right, and you just want your way. You're like a child. It's not going to work. Go away. And, things like that. But people need to learn that actually...
there's a skill there. There is. I mean, you talked about being wise as serpents.
Yeah. Absolutely right. Wise as serpent and harmless as doves. And those two things are absolutely crucial together. But that's not something which comes naturally. And you touch on aspects of that in your book, which again is why I think it's so brilliant. And, because people need help, not just this is what you got to do, but I don't know how to do it. I don't know what to do. I'm just in the dark on this. So I think another reason why your book is so great is because you introduce all these topics and how to deal with them. And it is an introduction and there is a lot more to come. But if it were longer, people wouldn't have, But I think it's short enough for people to pick it up and to read. And anything else I've missed from the book that you think we should highlight?
I think at the very end, I do talk again about loving people. And I can't emphasize this strongly enough. By taking a particular stance and stuff, we are not being judgmental. That is not the purpose. But the purpose is to say human beings are incredibly special. A family is at the very heart of God's plans for the world. You just can't have a stable world without family. And by trying to protect the family, we're trying to protect society. We don't want a world where people get hurt and broken unnecessarily. We want a world where people thrive because that's what God wants. And we Christians get so easily, and not just Christians, but certainly Christians get so easily dismissed as being, for example, transphobes or homophobes or whatever. That is just not the case. We don't hate people. We're not antagonistic towards folk. We want the very best for people. But somehow the whole narrative has been so twisted that when we call for the best for people in an environment where people can thrive, we get shouted down for doing so. Isn't that bizarre?
I mean, that's another good point for people to recognize. So when you enter into these kind of discussions and debates, because there is no logical argument to defeat you. So, for example, born this way, well, actually, the science doesn't say that. The benefits of children growing up with a married mother and father, biological mother and father, are very, very clear and undeniable. There is no logical argument on the other side. So you need to expect what's going to happen, which is that A, they'll get their friends, B, they'll go straight to ad hominem attacks, which means they can't attack your argument, so they'll attack you. The last couple of days, I've had all sorts of attacks against my physicality, my intellect, because nobody challenges the argument, because you can't. So they'll attack you and try and undermine you as an individual. I get that hurts and that's quite difficult. But once you realize it's a game, it's a tactic written in a book, literally, this is the play. This is what they're told to do.
Absolutely. And sound bites do that.
And get their friends to come and pile on as well. The idea is to just destroy your will because they can't destroy your argument.
Yes.
And once you realize this is a game, you're just a fraud, it takes a lot of the passion out of the feelings behind being insulted publicly, because you think, I know what you're doing. I know this is a game you're playing. It's a tactic you're following, and it's not going to work.
I'm always careful on Twitter, because I do like tweeting because it's part of a public conversation. I don't do any ad hominem attacks. I don't want to attack the person.
No, you should never do that.
But I do want to discuss the argument. What are you saying here? What's your inference here? And what often happens is that when I respond to somebody on that platform and deal with their argument, they'll come back, as you say, with these very personal attacks, very emotive. And my response always is, I notice you haven't dealt with the point I made. Now, please answer the question, because I'm raising a very serious point, and all you can do in response to that is attack me as a person and insult me, but you're still not dealing with the question I posed to you. And we just need to hold our nerve in situations like this. What is the actual issue here involved? Quite aside from personality and emotion and everything else, what is the principle we're defending here?
The other thing they do, which you and I are both immune from, is they then go for your employer too. So they'll find out who you work for, and they'll get their friends to write to your employer or your company and say, do you realize you've got this person working for you with homophobic blah 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 blah, and your employer then thinks, oh, I don't want negative publicity. I probably almost certainly agree with what the person said, but actually I don't want anything to affect our profits or anything else like that. And they'll use those, and again, they're literally described as the tactical approach to shut you down. So, I get that. But again, and that's, I can't prescribe for anybody what to do in that situation, whether to risk that or not, But again, if you're polite, if you're courteous, if you're factual, actually the Public Order Act gives us explicit permission to discuss parties to a marriage or people's sexualities and our disagreement or otherwise with it. That's not in and of itself hatred. The support of marriage has been said in the courts to be worthy of respect in a liberal democracy. And when these cases go to law, the judges invariably say you're quite, actually you're within your rights. You weren't being aggressive. You weren't being hateful. You were stating your position and your feeling, and the law. If we can't live in a country where people are not allowed to disagree with each other.
Absolutely.
Because how do you ever make progress? Not just in the areas of sexuality but in anything, in engineering, how do you ever say, I think your idea is bad because, oh, well, I'm offended, therefore you've committed an act of hate, I'm going to report you a non-crime hate incident. It would be absurd. We've got to be able to disagree with each other. It's what makes us better.
Absolutely. And actually, it's what tests an argument. An argument is tested not because somebody shouts it very loudly. It's tested because two people have a discussion about it and work out who has the evidence on their side. And I actually got one letter of complaint, specific one directed to me on the book that accused me of hate speech. So I wrote back to the person to say, I appreciate that this has raised some emotion with you and you're triggered, but can you please point to a single phrase of mine where I have expressed hatred or disdain or disrespect to any individual? And if you can do, I'm happy to apologize. No problem apologizing for things. But what I was trying to do is to make an argument. And of course, the person couldn't do that because I have not castigated anybody. I've not criticized anybody. I'm not expressing hatred of anybody. I'm just saying, what do I think is good for society?
Yeah, but even though, I mean, it's fair enough. When you're having a heated debate, actually, sometimes it hurts. The biblical analogy of iron sharpening iron. Yeah, I mean that's abrasive. Yeah, iron filings are going all over the place when that's happening. But that's how you become sharper, because you get rid of the bad bits, because something else just as clever as you is rubbing up against you and making you better. And that's actually a good thing, even though it hurts to realize how stupid you are when you meet somebody who undermines your arguments.
It is good, and debate is good because it does decipher truth from fiction. And we do need that. And if we take debate out of the public square, we're in big trouble. We absolutely need debate, because iron sharpens iron is a great way of expressing it. How will we discover truth if we can't get people with opposing views to discuss openly and sanely, and then work out whose argument carries the real logical weight to it?
Yeah,
you have to be able to do that.
Yeah,
that's why no platform is so dangerous. Because people shut down the argument. You can't have that discussion, and therefore, how can you discover truth? This doesn't work.
You're quite right. And again, just to emphasize to listeners, watchers, the point of your book in its brilliantly succinct way is to say to people, look, there are these really important, and of course, we do have three types of people, don't we? There's people who make things happen, people who watch things happen, and people who wonder what happened, and as Christians, we ought not be in the last category. We need to get ourselves into the first category of making things happen. You are the salt of the earth, Get in, rub yourself in whatever way you can feel you can do, in your little quiet way or your big noisy way, whatever fits with you, try and have an impact, because that is the Great Commission, So yeah, I want to thank you for the book. I really, again, let me remind people, if they're still listening at this point, please forward it to any pastors in the hope that they get the short book and that they read it and that they realize the need to help their own people engage with society, because we are the hope, the only hope, And then what else would you recommend we do? I mean, I would say actually, look at the singleness crisis. If we can encourage people, young people, to get married sooner, to have kids, to stay married, to bring those kids up in the teachings and admonitions of the Lord, as the scriptures say, develops a great society, leads on to other things. Anything else you think we should be doing, either as Christians or as non-Christians, to nudge the debate in a good direction?
I think how we live is actually really important here. My wife and I celebrated our 29th anniversary recently.
And, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. It's been the best decision of my life to marry Debbie, by far the best decision of my life, because of what it does for my life, the enhancement, the enrichment, and to be married for that length of time to somebody. I had a young person saying to me, do you ever get to a point where it becomes boring? Well, not really, because when you're committed to your own marriage and you work at it, and every relationship needs to be worked at, when you do work at it, it gets better and better. It gets more rich, more enjoyable, more stable. And I think what Christians can do is, in their own lives, commit to their own marriages, really work hard at that, because what we say from the platform, for example, when we're preaching, has to be backed up by the way we live our lives. So commit to your own marriage. Make sure that that's something that you really work hard at, so that people can see from the outside, this is something which is good. It works. It brings joy, and it can bring stability to life.
Again, you make such wonderfully salient points all the time, Stephen, that just cannot be ignored. But the idea that marriage does require working, and there are times when the feelings aren't there, right? And there are times when you think, what on earth did I do? But you've entered into a covenant, not just with the other person, but with God, if you're a Christian, with wider society and culture. Even if you're not, we would say it's a creation ordinance marriage, that the idea is it's not just about the two of you anymore. It's about society. And you need to stick together for the sake of society. Of course, there are examples where that becomes impossible. But the idea of no fault, where you can just walk away with impunity, we've got that already. It's called not married. Marriage is supposed to be something different, and we need to keep it something different. And you're absolutely right. Christians need to take a lead on that. Churches need to take a lead on helping marriages to succeed. Running, I don't know, we take MOTs for our car every year. Well, a marriage is so much more important and so much more complex than an automobile. Let's have regular top-ups where people with good marriages and healthy marriages also go to, let's top it up. Let's make some time. Other advice I've heard, which is brilliant, which we keep struggling to implement, but we try to, take some time out for yourselves every week, an hour and a half. Take yourself out of the situation where you're not looking at your phone, where you're not doing stuff, but you're talking to each other.
Two words that I think are important. They're old-fashioned words in one sense, but faithfulness and integrity. Now, those are vital in all kinds of areas of life as well. They're certainly vital in family life. And those values of faithfulness and integrity are both biblical values, by the way. They're strongly expressed in the Bible. God expressed faithfulness and integrity in all that he did and does. And so we need to do likewise.
And that, again, that is a discipline and it's a commitment. It's very easy to go out if you want to and find another sexual partner or to look at porn online. But you've got to realize the damage that's doing to your emotional bond with the other person. It's going to kill it. It's going to break it. It's going to ruin the trust. And those sorts of things, okay, once done, maybe you can get them back. But much better not to do that in the first place.
And you use the term covenant. I've solemnized marriages very often. And I remember one couple coming to see me, and I had a conversation with them about, they weren't people of faith. But I've married folk who aren't people of faith. That's fine, because I think the marriage as an institution is really important. And I always talk to couples beforehand. I do kind of a marriage guidance class with them, whether they're Christians or not. And this particular couple, when I asked them, why do you want to get married? What does marriage mean to you? The man in the relationship said, he said, well, I thought I'd have a go at it. And if it doesn't work out, I can begin again. So I just said, stop right there. For me, marriage is of such importance, whether you're a Christian or not, it's of such importance that if this thing for you is just, I'll have a go, see if it works. And if it doesn't work, I'll try again. That's not acceptable. That's not what marriage is. It's this utter commitment of loyalty and fidelity to this person, a commitment that I'm intending to make for the rest of my life, and I'm not going to break it. I said, if you can't say that, and I know that life can bring about all kinds of situations, and I'm not blaming or criticizing folk who, for example, do end up in a broken marriage or a divorce. But as you begin this process, if you can't say, I'm utterly committed to this, I will give my life to this thing, then you shouldn't be doing it, because it's that absolute commitment. And that's, I think, how we should see marriage. It is not a disposable thing. Whether you're a Christian or not, whether you're religious or not, it is not a disposable thing. It's a solemn commitment that you make to this individual, that you'll commit yourself for life to this person. That has to be what we see marriage as being, and what we practice and what we preach.
Yeah, and that requires two things. It requires fulfillment in a marriage, which is a whole other topic and conversation, but it also requires not putting yourself into positions of too much temptation outside the marriage, and that, again, those are very, very practical things which sometimes people and couples just need help with.
Totally.
Because it's not obvious sometimes. Both the fulfillment, the absolute need for fulfillment in a marriage, and the need to avoid temptation outside of a marriage. Both of those things are very practical. That
just
people
be wise.
could do with some help.
Don't play with fire. Don't be stupid. Wise in the way you conduct yourself. That's important in every area of life, but it's particularly important in this area because the family and marriage is so central for the health of our society. So central that we just can't play with fire here. We've got to be serious about it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We've interviewed John Whitty Jr., who I mentioned earlier, who's written a 600-page book on the benefits of monogamy, which is, from a worldly perspective, which are huge for society. And it's interesting how There's been research published recently, quite a lot of it actually. And if you go across to our website and the resources section, there's a research sheet with some research on and other bits and bobs. But it's pretty easy to find on the internet. The not cohabiting before marriage. The likelihood of marriage succeeding is much greater if you don't cohabit before marriage, and is also affected by premarital sexual partners. If you have premarital sexual partners, it dramatically reduces the likelihood that your marriage will succeed. So the idea of premarital chastity is actually very important, regardless of what society says. We're teaching kids about sex in schools. David Payton, industrial economist who we've also interviewed recently, he's done the research which is quite clear. The more you teach kids about sex, the more they're likely to have sex. You should be teaching them abstinence. That's the thing that actually works, and leads to longer lasting marriages and more fulfillment for boys and girls. Why don't we give that a go, for example, and just see if it works? Because all we do is keep teaching the other one.
Absolutely. But even talking the way you are talking raises heckles, and it's perceived as outrageous. But it's not actually. It's a common sense approach, and I think the word respect is really important here. If we really respect the person that we are married to or intending to get married to, even if we haven't met that person yet, but one day we will meet that person, and I'll commit my life to them. Surely the extent to which I respect them now, even though I haven't yet met that person, must have a positive impact on that relationship when it finally happens. Because you're able to say to that person, I've saved myself for you because of the respect that I have for you and the dignity with which I want to treat you. That those are really good values.
You're absolutely right, and you're approaching it as you would do, of course, from a Christian perspective.
Yes.
And Christians have an absolute obligation to adhere to that.
Yes.
But actually, from a secular perspective as well, the evidence is abundantly clear that these things make sense. And one might say, well, if there is a God and he's good and he's wise and he says these things, why wouldn't there be abundant evidence in society that it makes sense? And there we go. So that's quite good.
And the evidence is that's the whole point. The evidence is there.
It is there, yeah. Which is why I started off by saying, actually, whether they're Christians or non-Christians listening to this, get the book, read the book, In His Image, A Biblical Introduction to Social Ethics, because it's what's in there is for everyone. It's common sense. You actually say that, well, common sense comes from the Bible. Fair enough. It is common sense. And a Christian myself, I would take it on face value biblically, but anyone else can look at it and say, absolutely, it is common sense. The data, the literature kind of backs it up.
It is not just a book for Christians. I want to emphasize that Christians will benefit from it. It's not just for Christians. Yeah. I think the values there are values that can affect and impact and enrich anybody's life, irrespective of what their worldview is.
So everyone, buy it, read it, buy it for a friend, send it to a friend, send this video to your pastor, send it to somebody else. More importantly, just do something, get involved. That we're losing the culture quickly. And the only way to get it back is to get involved. You are the salt of the earth.
Yes.
Stephen McCoyd, Reverend Dr. Stephen McCoyd, you're just an absolute superhero, and it's such a privilege to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a great privilege for me. Thank you.
Great. Take care now.